Welcome everybody to the Langley Adams Library. Most of you know me, I'm Sue Nakanishi, and I really am thrilled that all of you came. I am very excited about our guest tonight, Mark Kantrowitz. He was a lawyer and a judge, and he teaches right now at Northeastern, and he will tell you a little more about himself. I think we're in for an exciting evening, so sit back and enjoy. And I hope everyone got a little slip, my little plugs for our upcoming events. I'll make sure you get one. The only one, I did not put our October 21st, this Friday, the Magic Lanterns, which is going to be at Pentucket Middle School. And when we're all done, if you have any questions, I will have a time for questions and answers. I want to put a little plug. He has brought in copies of our book, if anybody's interested. And so, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Well, thank you very much. It is wonderful to be here and to show you how stupid I truly am. I had never heard of your town. To show you how dumb I am. And it's such a beautiful town. My wife and I drove up from Canton, where we live, a beautiful drive. We drove around the town. What a beautiful place. Obviously, every restaurant is closed on Monday, so that was closed. So, yeah, both of them. So, we did find something up. But what an absolutely beautiful, beautiful,
So
beautiful
where's
town.
Canton?
Yes, you've never heard of Canton. That's correct. So, Canton is about 20 miles south of Boston, and it's and like this lovely town, it's also a lovely town. The book is about I write a common law and history for Lawyers Weekly. It's published in various Lawyers Weeklies around the nation, and it's about once famous, now totally forgotten or essentially forgotten cases in our history. And people very often will answer when I say, what's the case, the trial of the century? So what's a trial of the century? Yell something out.
OJ.
OJ, everybody says that. This is, I think, my 30th or 31st lecture on my book. And whenever I ask that question, people inevitably say, OJ Simpson. And my response to that, it's the OJ Simpson case will be totally forgotten 100 years from now. Easy for me to say because someone will be around. You're not going to come up and say, hey, you were wrong. O.J. Simpson. So, but it will be totally forgotten. And how do I know that? The reason I know that is taking a look at history. Fatty Arbuckle. Fatty Arbuckle was, and some people you know Fatty Arbuckle. I'm going to ask you about Fatty Arbuckle. Fatty Arbuckle was the premier comedian and actor in America 100 or so years ago. Number one. Who's the number one actor today? Who's the number one? Who's your favorite comedian? Who's your favorite comedian? You have no. I guess I don't.
Ray
Pick on the
Romano.
spot. Keep us. What is that?
Ray Romano.
Ray Romano, very good. He's very good. A lot of people like Will Ferrell,
Thank you.
and there's
you.
all sorts of comedians and actors. But imagine, if you will, if you woke up tomorrow morning and the headline was, name of actor Will Ferrell, for instance. Well, let me give you a better one. Brad is accused of murdering Angie. Given the events of the last few weeks, maybe a little more likely, a little less likely, I don't know. But how big of a story would that be? How big of a story would it be if Brad was charged with murdering Angie, or vice versa? Angie was charged with murdering Brad Pitt. How big of a story would that be?
Big.
Big, right, 24/7.
Yeah.
Absolutely, 24/7. It would go on for years. The trial would be covered on live TV. After the trial, it still would be covered. Books and movies would be written about it. Yet in 100 years, it would be totally forgotten. Because that's what happened to Fatty Arbuckle. Fatty Arbuckle, the number one comedian at his time, and he's charged with the rape murder of Virginia Rapp, who changed her name to Virginia Rappé. And to show you how big he was, back around 110 years ago, with the average salary was about $4,000 a year. He was making over $1 million a year.
Oh my God.
Right? His car was so big, it had a bathroom in it. That's a big car, right? So So he was recently separated from his wife. He was in Los Angeles filming. Decided he wanted to get away for Labor Day weekend, so he drove up to San Francisco. In San Francisco, he met a few friends who we knew, and they rented 3 rooms at a beautiful, luxurious, of course, hotel in downtown San Francisco. They rented 3 rooms. The one was for Fatty, Roscoe. The other one was for his two friends, and the middle room was a party room. And it was going to be a party that was going to last the whole weekend, frankly, basically. And then he found out that Virginia Rappe was going to come to the party, and he was a little taken aback because Virginia, notwithstanding the fact that she'd been named like the upcoming starlet of 19, whatever, the early 1900s, she had a very, very questionable reputation. In fact, the story, probably apocryphal, but when I was doing my research, the story I came to that described her said that she had sexual relations with so many people at a studio and was spreading a venereal disease. They had to shut down the studio for 3 weeks. Now, let me just step back a minute. People who say, oh, the good old days. Oh, the good old, they were so much better, the good old days. Baloney. It was, if anything, they were worse. Cocaine use, drug use, it was crazy. I just wrote an article for the Patriot Ledger a few weeks ago about the current presidential race. And I said, if you think this is bad, it's nothing. It's nothing. You compare this, getting off track a little bit, you compare this race to John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, to Douglas and Lincoln, to Harrison, who stole the election, literally stole the election. It's nothing going on today. It's American history, right? And that's why American history is so much fun. But people say, oh, the good old days, people were more moral back then. People were better back then. Cocaine use was abundant, certainly in Hollywood. Poorer people obviously would have a harder time, although alcohol abuse, that's perhaps the primary reason for prohibition, perhaps our greatest mistake in our nation's history, gave rise to organized crime. But one of the reasons was because of the great debilitating effect of alcohol on our nation. Not only that, domestic abuse, which came out of the abuse of alcohol. So you can kind of understand why people, did what they did back then. But if you think times are bad today, they're no worse than the good old days. So let's get back to Fatty Arbuckle. So Virginia Rappe, or Virginia Rappe, she changed her name to Rappe, had a tough reputation. Fatty was a little wary of her, but the party started, the party continued, and everybody's partying. Everybody's drinking, everybody's doing what everybody does. They go into other rooms to have sex, having a good old time. And then Virginia Rappe got, as she very often, sadly, got very, very drunk. And she had the reputation when she got very, very drunk. What did she do when she got very, very drunk? Hey, guess what she did when she got very, very drunk? I don't want to put you on the spot, just take a guess. Anything. She threw up on herself. Anything. Right? Whatever you want to say.
Was she being more promiscuous when she was drunk?
That was good. She would rip off her clothes. She would get drunk and she would rip off her clothes. So
well,
she
who
gets.
doesn't?
That's true. What else is there? Do we have that on film? Can we show this young woman over here? Right, and the camera is shining right
You're finding out what your mother's really like tonight.
I already know.
She already. I think one of you are going to have to leave. So she gets very drunk. She goes into Fatty's room. Fatty goes in, sees she's very, very intoxicated. He goes to the bar area in his room. He gets some water. He sprinkles it on it in an attempt to calm it down. And he's going to go out and get a doctor. Somebody comes into the room, and this woman who came into the room, Maud Delmont, was a professional witness. So if you wanted her to testify to anything, you would call her up and she would testify to anything. Most commonly in divorce cases, right? If you wanted to prove that your husband was screwing around, you would call her and she would come into court and testify. Her husband is screwing around, right? Not a woman with a great history of veracity. So she comes into the room. She had just recently met of Virginia. She walked into the room, and the following very fateful words were uttered, which would come to destroy Fatty Arbuckle's career. She says, "Morty, look what he did to me. Fatty did this to me, or Roscoe did this to me." And she got sicker and sicker. A doctor was summoned. She came to get treated. Roscoe never gave it any second thought. He didn't do anything, wasn't concerned about anything. She gets sicker and sicker, and several days later, she dies. And before you know it, he's charged with her rape and murder. And the newspapers, once again, people think newspapers are bad today. Back then, they would just make it up. In fact, of the Fatty Arbuckle, a few people said they heard of Fatty Arbuckle. What is it that you remember about Fatty Arbuckle? Because let me preface, before you say, what the thing people remember about Fatty Arbuckle is the thing that was made up. And it's the thing, the myth became fact over shortly after time. Like, what's the thing you remember about Fatty?
He was big and fat.
He was big and fat. That was good. There you go, his name, Fatty, very right. So, but about the murder, do you remember anything about the murder? About the murder, it was reported that she died either due to his great girth on top of her, or, more likely, and this is rather scandalous and disgusting, that he inserted a champagne bottle into her, and it ruptured her innards, and she died of that. And that's how it was reported. The press reported that, totally made up. Totally made up. When the press, when Fatty went in and saw that she was sick, he goes to the room, he gets some water and sprinkles it on her. That story is turned into the press. He got a champagne bottle, goes over to her, and raped her. Totally made up. And my book is replete with other stories where the press totally made up. I don't have anything against the press. I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment. But all I'm saying is that the more things change, the more they remain the same. And back then, believe it or not, it was worse than it is today. Okay, back then, the New York Times, it would be comparable to the National Enquirer today. Okay, it's just, and if you,
What year are we?
you have to read my book. Read my book, you'll get everything you want to know about that. This is your,
What year are we in?
well, right now
When
we're
this
2016. This is the early 1900s, the start of Hollywood. Okay, so and the murder took place in like around 1918, 1919, around there. Okay, so Prohibition had just started. So notwithstanding the fact that Prohibition had started and you couldn't get liquor overflowed certainly in Hollywood and certainly at that party. So it's reported that that he had raped and murdered her. He goes to trial. The first trial, a sensationalistic trial, lasts a long time. A lot of witnesses are called. And it's a hung jury, 10-2 for acquittal. And the two people who held out saying he was guilty, one of whom had a friend who worked for the DA's office. So people think, jury system is somehow rigged today. No. Back then, it was, a lot of people who sat on juries probably shouldn't have been. So in fact, that witness, that juror, before the trial had said to someone, I don't care what the evidence is, he's guilty. Now that's not a juror with an open mind, obviously. So they go to trial, it's a hung jury. What happens with a hung jury? It's a do-over. So Fatty, knowing that, his lawyers knowing it was 10-2, they mailed it in for the second trial. They just don't really, put their best effort in there. And this time it's another hung jury, this time for a conviction. So it was like something for something, but in majority voting to convict. So a do-over, the third trial, and then finally, Fatty's defense team got it right, and they tried the case. The jury hears the case, goes out and comes back in fill in the blank. How many minutes later? Just throw some. How many minutes later? How long did it take the jury to decide his fate?
30 minutes.
What's that?
10.
30 minutes is a good guess. 10's an even better. Did you read my book? Did you read my book? So 10 minutes. And during that 10 minutes that they're finding him not guilty, they have time to write a note to the judge on the jury thing. Usually it says, is the defendant guilty or not guilty? What it said was, not only is the defendant not guilty, he's innocent. And we, the jury, hope that it will not have an adverse effect on his career. In fact, his career had been destroyed. Once it came out, it had been destroyed. All of his films were pulled. None of his films were shown anywhere. He couldn't find work. He had a lot of expenses, obviously. He lived a high life. His attorneys cost him a fortune, and he was really, really going broke. And notwithstanding the fact what the jury said, his career, in fact, was ruined. And what happened is that his good friend Buster Keaton, who was a famous comedian, I don't know if you remember Buster Keaton, said, look, I'll try to find you some work, but you're going to have to write under a pseudonym. So he wrote under a pseudonym. His pseudonym was William B. Good. Good. So even he was, he was a prankster even then. So he started writing, and finally, about 12 years later, Warner Brothers finally said, you were innocent. We're going to give you an opportunity to come back, and they signed him to a contract. And he said that afternoon when he signed the contract, "This is the happiest day of my life." And that evening he died in his sleep. So, interestingly enough, Virginia probably died of she had undergone a number of abortions, and she had probably died due to the ramifications or the effects of her most recent abortion, which was probably right around the time of that incident. So that's Fatty Arbuckle, the #1 comedian in America. During the Fatty Arbuckle trial, people woke up to the following headline. Now, every day the headline would be what's going on with Fatty. Fatty's case was knocked off the top of the newspaper for the following story. Let me go back a little. Who's America's most famous director? Spielberg, Scorsese. Say you wake up tomorrow morning, God forbid, you read this headline: Scorsese found murdered. How big of a story would that be? That's precisely what happened. William Desmond Taylor, the biggest director in America, the Spielberg, the Scorsese of his time. Yet 100 years later, he was murdered February 1st, 1922. 100 years later, or 96 years later, 94 years later, whatever it is, my math is obviously not very good. No one knows who William Desmond Taylor is. Notwithstanding the fact he was as big back then as Scorsese was today. William Desmond Taylor is the most interesting figure, I think, in my book. It's interesting to me because notwithstanding the fact that well, the reason it is interesting to me is that I handled a bunch of murder cases as a private attorney, about 24 murder cases, and his case is a murder case, obviously, and it's unsolved. And for the life of me, I have tried to put what happened, and I just can't figure it out, quite frankly. It was so mesmerizing a case that in the 1980s, a fellow professor out in Arizona called Bruce Long decided he's going to start a website called Taylorology. If you go to your computer tonight and plug in Taylorology, a 1,000,000-word document will come up. And it's every aspect of the William Desmond Taylor life and case. And he's a fascinating character. And I'll just tell you one very brief story to indicate how fascinating he was. He was born in Ireland. His father was British. He comes to America at around 18 years old. He winds up in New York. He's a very stately fellow, tall, good, every woman was in love with him. Every guy wanted to be with him. He was just the Tom Brady of directors. Okay, for lack of, the best description I can give you. Someone who's just a likable person, a charismatic person. Everybody wants to be with them. So Taylor is married, has a young daughter, living in New York City. He owns an antique shop, which back then was big. Okay, he owned an antique shop on Fifth Avenue. That was big. So he tells his wife he's going to go to the Vanderbilt Parade Center on the island, and he goes out, and that's the last she sees of him. That's the last she sees of him. 10 years later, they're at a movie, the wife and the daughter. They're watching a movie called Captain Alvarez, and dashing on was the star of the movie, and his wife said to her daughter, "Oh my God, there's your father." He had wound up he traveled around America. He was painting gold in Alaska. He was in Colorado. He spent like 7 or 8 years as a real nomad, traveling all over the place. He winds up in Hollywood, becomes an actor, and then decides he would rather direct than star in films, and it soon becomes Hollywood's #1 director. And he's starring in the films. Now, there's a cast of thousands who could have murdered him, frankly. And just let me tell you his last day on Earth. So his last day on Earth, Mabel Normand, who was the Tina Fey of her time, say, or Amy Poehler, or Amy Schumer, America's leading comedian. In fact, she was in a lot of Fatty Arbuckle films with Fatty. She and Taylor were very, very good friends. And he told her, come to my house, I got a couple of books for you. He was a very, educated guy. And he gives her a couple of books. She goes to the house, he gives her a couple of books. He has a manservant, Henry Peavy, who was African American and had to leave early because they had laws forbidding minorities being, this is in Hollywood, minorities had to be off the street by a certain time. So he served cocktails and then he leaves about 7:30 or so. So Mabel's with him, they laugh, they have a drink, and then he escorts her to her car. Now he lives in Alvarado Court, which is where, a lot of stars, he lived right here in Alvarado Court. So he walks her right down here to her chauffeur-driven limousine, puts her in the limousine and says, I'll call you at 9 o'clock. She turns around, she blows kisses to him, and the car drives away. It's opined that the time that he took to walk down, the door was left open, and his murderer, who was in an alley here, slipped in and was waiting for him when he got back. The next morning, let me just cut back around, shortly after 8 o'clock, his neighbor, who's catty-corner to him, hears what she thinks is a shot. She says to her maid, did you hear that? And the maid says, geez, I don't know. And she goes out and she sees someone coming out of William Desmond Taylor's apartment. And the person who comes out of the apartment, it's about a distance of like where I am to where you are. And this, her name is Faith McLean, she sees his killer, right? The killer looks at Faith and then very calmly turns back as if he's ducking back into the apartment to say something to William Desmond Taylor. That's what Faith thought. He turned back like he was going to say something, and then walks out again, looks at her, and then goes down an alleyway. Okay, that was the person who murdered William Desmond Taylor. Now talk about a cool cucumber, right? You just commit this heinous act, someone sees you, and you have presence of mind to be so casual. Anyway, let's cut ahead 12 hours, 8 o'clock or so in the morning, Henry Peavy returns, and he walks in the door, and laying on the floor, as if he was asleep, was William Desmond Taylor. And Peavy looks a little close and says, oh my God, he's been shot, and starts screaming, and pretty soon, the cavalry is coming to find out what happened. In fact, a single shot had killed them, and the shot came right around here and comes up the back and kills him. And because of the alignment or misalignment on his jacket and his shirt, it looked like his hands could have been up, which would indicate robbery, right? Yeah. But the problem is that he had valuables on him, he had money on him, nothing was taken. Nothing was taken at all, so they quickly ruled out robbery. They figured he might have been at his desk, sitting at his desk working on his taxes. His tax forms were there. He had met with spoke with his accountant earlier that day. There was no question he was working on his taxes. So he could have been working on his taxes, hunched over, and his jacket would rise up a lot. Or what I think is the most likely scenario is that he was in the embrace of a woman, and she takes a gun out and fires one shot. Right? That to me makes the most sense. I have no idea. 4 books have been written. In fact, the most recent book is just right outside by Man. 4 different books have been written about the murder with 4 different conclusions as to who committed it. So it's a great whodunit, and the sad thing is we will never know who done it. And all I can say is that there's a cast of thousands. And to make it even more sordid, Mary Miles Minter, who was an outstanding young actress at the time, being groomed to be the next great actress. She was a young woman, she was only like 18 or 19. she was in love with Taylor. He was 50. He really had put him, he had this, I'm too old for you type of thing. But she was in love with him. No, in love with him. No, she had the stage mother from hell, Charlotte Shelby, who might have been involved in the murder, as evidenced by the following little tidbit. She goes on set where Taylor and her daughter is, and says for everybody to hear, if you don't leave my daughter, I'm going to, fill in the blank, kill you. Okay, so she was a real tough cookie. The problem is she did not fit the description of the person that Faith McLean saw. She was just, way too short. So I'm telling you, there's a cast of thousands who could have committed the murder. Hi, how are you? And I'll start over.
I hate to tell you, one of my professors did that for me in college.
Okay, I won't be so mean. So William Desmond Taylor, I think it's the best story in the book for the simple reason that it's an unsolved crime, and you just don't know who did it. And once again, I write about different stories in the book where there were unsolved crimes where you know who did it. It just wasn't proven who did it. In other cases, you just don't know who did it. The death of the murder of the beautiful cigar girl in 1841, early 1840, in New York City. Beautiful woman. John Anderson opens up a tobacco store on the Lower East Side, and he says, I'm going to do something very European that's not done in America. And this is what he did. I'm going to hire the most beautiful woman to work for me at my store, in the hopes that people, in 5 points, that people are going to come in, be so enthralled with her beauty, it's going to be great for business. It was that and more. It was that and more. And people came in including Edgar Allan Poe, and when she winds up getting murdered, he fictionalizes it. He calls it the murder of Marie Roget. Not her name is Mary Rogers. He changed it to Marie Roget, and he puts it in Paris as opposed to New York. Other than that, the story is basically very, very true. Beautiful woman. She disappears, and it's, once again, it's great who done it and who knows who done it. I talk about a little about it in the book. I'm going to jump ahead, because my time is starting to run out, about Ed Gein, the famous Ed Gein, who no one has ever heard of. Now, when I was teaching law, I teach law school. I was teaching law school class about a year or so ago, and I just happened to, one of my classes mention Ed Gein, and 2 young ladies shot him and said, we know who Ed Gein is. And I said, how do you know? And she said, well, we're from Wisconsin. And I'll tell you why this is important. So Ed Gein grows up in the 40s, and he's with his, he's married. His father is a very weak man. He's got an older brother, and once again, the mother from hell. Augusta Gein was the type of person who thought all women are evil and all men are evil. They're all evil. They're all after the same thing. They're all evil. Sex is only to have children. She had 2 children. She wanted 2 girls. She had 2 boys. She was even more miserable. To get away from the influence of small town America, she moves out to Plainfield, Indiana, or Wisconsin, I always mistake it, Wisconsin, and buys a farm in the middle of nowhere. Now, there's no electricity there. There's no indoor plumbing there. It's just, a big, ramshackle type of place. Augusta eventually dies, and Ed is left to himself. Now, Ed was the village idiot. He had a weak left eye. He was bullied. People made fun of him. But he was one of those likable guy. Ed, can you come and give me a hand on my farm? Sure. Can you help me do this? Sure. Can you help me fix a tractor? Sure. So although he was a village idiot, he was kind of like the likable village idiot. So now Plainfield is just a nondescript, nothing type of town in the middle of nowhere. There's a little bar that's kind of built like this with gray. Mary Hogan runs it. So someone goes into Mary Hogan's little ramshackle bar, and I think it was 54, and oh my God, not only is Mary not there, but there's a trail of blood where her body obviously had been dragged. Now she weighed over 200 pounds, so it was kind of hard to drag her body. Who killed Mary Hogan? Who knows? A year later, who killed him? The newspaper. Who killed Mary Hogan? 1 year anniversary. Who knows? 2 years later, who killed Mary Hogan? Who knows? It's a great, great mystery. Meanwhile, deer hunting season, November, starting in Wisconsin, it's only for 9 days. So everybody's going to hunt deer. Ed goes into town the day before, goes into Warren's, like department store, small department store, and asks his Bernice, proprietor, I need some kerosene, you're gonna be around tomorrow, I'll need some, I'll pick it up. She says, yeah, I'll be around tomorrow, you can pick it up then. The next day, the whole town is closed for obvious reasons, because it's deer hunting season, everybody goes out deer hunting. They come back that night, someone asks Mrs. Wharton's son, geez, you know, how come your mother's store is closed today? And he goes, what? He goes running over there, tries to get in, the door's locked, finally gets in, and his mother's missing. And he says, oh my God, what's happening? And then they put two and two together. You know who was there around here yesterday asking about Ed Gein, that strange guy? So let's go talk to Ed Gein. So they go up and they go to his house. He's not at his house, he's at the next farm over where he's been known to get a warm meal and some companionship. He's eating there and he goes in and the cops go in. They say, Ed, can we talk to you? And he says, words a defense attorney like myself never want to hear. He says, is this about Mrs. Wharton? Hello? So it took the police about 37 seconds to solve that murder. So they go back to Ed's house. Now, if you made a movie of this, you would not have to change anything. You would not have to change one iota. The police go back to the house. Now imagine, if you will, it's the Plains. There's a dark house on a dark night in the middle of nowhere. The wind is howling. They go into the house that has no electricity and no plumbing. And it's a pigsty. Ed was one of those guys who never threw out anything, threw garbage all over the place. You ever see the TV show Hoarders? That's what it was Hoarders. So two cops go in there with a flashlight and they're jumping over crap and garbage and everything. And one of them is looking around and brushes against something, which gives way a little. So the cop looks over his shoulder and says, oh my God, it's a deer. It's hanging by his hind legs, it's been gutted. Needless to say, we have now found Mrs. Wharton, okay? And the police officer seeing that, goes screaming out and throws up, and pretty soon the police come and they go in. They go into Ed's bedroom and his bedpost, the head of Mary Hogan and the head of Mrs. Wharton. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. He had boxes full of female parts. He had waste paper baskets made of human skin. He had, the thing that pulls this down made of something. I won't tell you why. He had this made. Read my book if you want. It was truly, truly, truly disgusting. The interesting thing about this became the #1 story in America. It was in Life magazine. I have the Life magazine. It's about a 10 to 12 page spread in Life magazine. And it really scandalized America because people just were not used to that. So a local novelist, a local writer said, I'm going to write a story about this, but I'm going to fictionalize it. So I'm going to change Ed Gein's name. What should I call him? I'll call him Norman Bates. And I'll name my book Psycho. Okay, so Ed Gein is the real Norman Bates. He is the seed from which Nightmare on Elm Street, every slasher movie, Silence of the Lambs, every major story every slasher movie has as its origin Ed Gein. So once again, the biggest story in America in the 50s, and now it's just totally forgotten. So once again, there's 30 similar stories to that in here. And a lot of stories you're going to come to the end, you go, just like you just did, oh my God, that's interesting. Who would have known? This is Lana Turner, remember? Peyton Place, Lana Turner. And this is her boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato, who was a mobster for the Mickey Cohen crime family in Los Angeles. Yeah, if anybody saw that recent movie about 3 years ago with Sean Penn as Mickey Cohen, the only similarity between the movie and reality was there was a gangster named Mickey Cohen in Los Angeles. So they totally fictionalized it. In fact, in the movie, he doesn't go into jail or get in trouble for murder. In fact, he went to jail as Al Capone did for income tax evasion. So Johnny Stompanato used to slap around and beat up Lana Turner. Lana Turner was married about 8 times. She had numerous affairs with numerous people. The good old days. Everything was pure back then, right? So she really, and it was her daughter from her second husband, Cheryl Crane, who was she heard her mother arguing with Stompanato, and then Stompanato winds up getting a knife in the stomach, allegedly from Cheryl. Some people think it could have been Lana who did it. Who knows? But Cheryl Crane was charged with the crime. Interestingly enough, he was a Marine who fought in the Pacific during World War II. So you would think that, he's obviously a very tough guy. He's a pretty interesting type of guy. So I hope you buy my book. I'll give you a great discount. It's going to 29. It's $24.99. So I'll be happy to sign it. And if not, thank you so much for coming and have a great day.
Any questions? Do we need questions? Like
Yeah, any questions?
the Shepherd case? Because
What's
can
that?
you talk about the Shepherd case a little bit?
The what case?
The Shepherd case in Cleveland?
Oh, yes, that.
Sam
It was
Shepherd.
funny because I was a judge on like August 16th. I came to work downtown Boston, John Adams Courthouse, downtown Boston, and I worked. 5 days later, I'm in Athens, Ohio, at my alma mater, Ohio University, as a visiting professor. And I taught there last year, fall quarter. And interestingly enough, the course I taught was with this. And all of my students were your age, probably, so they were all very, very, very young. And the 2 cases I wrote about that involved Chicago were Dolly Mapp, who gave rise to one of the greatest, most seminal criminal cases in American history, Mapp versus Ohio, which extended motions to suppress to the states. So wherever in America someone's getting tried with a crime, inevitably the defense attorney's filing a motion to suppress the crime because the evidence was unlawfully secured. In every state court, thanks to Dolly Mapp, we have that right. Now, I'll just very briefly say, because he asked about Shepherd, I'm talking about Mapp. If Dolly Mapp were made a movie, Jennifer Lopez, J-Lo would play her. She's a beautiful woman, sexy, fast. She lived in Cleveland, which, believe it or not, Cleveland in the late 50s, early 60s was a hot town. There was a lot going on there. There was boxing there, and there was a guy who was a numbers runner, did some numbers. He wasn't paying tribute to the higher-ups, so what happens? They blow up his house, so they blow up the front porch of his house. So a few days later, the police are investigating, and they call up. They get a tip that the person who blew up the house, Virgil Ogletree, has a Dolly Mapp's house. Now, Dolly Mapp was known to the police. She did numbers and that minor type of criminality. So they go to the house and they say, I wish I had a piece of paper. I have a warrant for your apartment. She grabs a warrant, she puts it down her dress, the battle starts, and then they get the warrant. Interestingly enough, the warrant was never, in all the court cases that happened as a result of that warrant was never produced, leading some to opine that the warrant never existed. It goes up to the United States Supreme Court. The interesting thing as a tidbit, the person whose house was blown up said to himself, I'm getting in trouble here. They're trying to kill me. In fact, right before he's supposed to testify, they shot him with buckshot, but he survived. There was some pellets were still in his head. He said he had already done time in jail for manslaughter. He said, I'm getting the heck out of Cleveland. So he said he moves to Las Vegas, and what does he do? Well, I'm from Cleveland. I know boxing. He becomes a boxing promoter. His name, Don King. The boxing promoter, Don King. So that's a footnote of history. Sam Shepherd is Richard Kimball, the fugitive. He's charged with with murdering his wife. It's a great story. In fact, one of my students in Ohio, when I'm talking about that case, raised her hand and said, the Shepherd family vacation house is next door to my girlfriend's. So, it was interesting. So he was charged with the murder of his wife. It goes to trial. He's found guilty. It's a great case of, did he do it, did he not do it? Personally, regardless of whether he did it or not, there's certainly did he do it beyond a reasonable doubt? I don't think he did. So they, anyway, that's definitely Bailey's one of his first famous cases, and they get a retrial because of pre-trial publicity, because the newspapers were saying, why isn't he in jail? He clearly did it. The newspapers would cover the trial, and there would be evidence that would be excluded, and then that night, the newspapers would report and the television would report on the excluded evidence, which the jurors obviously saw. So, in fact, I think in my book, I put murder and mystery, society, sex, and suspense were combined in this case in such a manner as to intrigue and captivate the public fancy to a degree perhaps unparalleled in recent annals. That was from the Ohio court who wrote that decision. So it goes up to the United States Supreme Court. They said because of the horrific pretrial publicity that he was given a new trial and he was found not guilty. Once again, newspapermen just going in and out of the place, taking evidence, planting evidence, that happened. William Desmond Taylor, the studio, had found out about it. He sent some people up to take out any incriminating evidence, talk about locking down the crime scene. It did not exist. So that's a great, that is a great case, a Shepard case.
I'm gonna date myself, but I went to Ball Wallace,
Okay, sure.
and I played basketball, and one of my teammates lived in Bay Village.
Yeah, sure.
And that was the big thing.
Yeah.
And then my husband is from Berea, and ironically, it was still up until people still go by the house.
Yeah, they do.
It's so funny.
Still, just like in Plainfield, and those two young ladies in my law class who were in their mid-20s knew about Ed Gein, and just like in Ohio, people still talk about Shepard. It's just
It's as if it happened yesterday,
It is, and it's one. It's interesting. What I found very interesting is some cases become part of the American fabric. Some people become part of the American fabric, like Marilyn Monroe. Well, everybody knows who Marilyn Monroe is, but interestingly enough, who was the other blonde bombshell who coexisted with Marilyn Monroe, who nobody...
Jane Mansfield.
Very good. Jane Mansfield, that nobody knows Jane Mansfield. Al Capone, his name kind of has become part of the American fabric, but most other organized crime figures, just have not, obviously. So it's very interesting how some people become part of America. Yeah.
What about the Natalie Wood? Do you have any?
Yeah, I didn't write about the Wood case. That's an interesting case. I didn't write about it because I try to confine myself to cases where people really did not hear of anyone. Like when I said Ed Gein, no one has heard about Ed Gein, but once I tell the story, people, that's interesting. But people really know about Natalie Wood, so that's a great story.
Keeps coming up.
Yeah, it keeps coming up. Yeah, and will we ever get the truth? Probably.
Remember Carol Chessman?
Who?
Chessman?
Yeah. So I think he was in Alcatraz too.
Well, he was ultimately put to death.
Yeah. So
What was it for what he actually committed? That's the whole question.
Well, look at Al Capone. He goes and does 11 years for income tax evasion, not for any of the murders. Yeah.
Well, now you've got Errol Flynn on the front there.
Yeah.
And I remember my heart going pitter-patter for Errol Flynn when I was young. And that was his quote, wasn't it? He said he liked old whiskey and young women.
Yeah, Errol Flynn was, the Harrison Ford or the Chris Evans of his
He's the
time.
person
So-
for whom the
And-
phrase "in like Flynn."
Very good.
name.
That's exactly right. That's where the phrase "in like Flynn" came from. And he was charged with statutory rape. I have a picture of one of the young ladies, and he's charged with the statutory rape of these two young ladies. Unquestionably, he did it. There is no question. He in fact did it, and he was found not guilty of that. And in a later interview, he said, "Well, my problem is I like my whiskey old and my women young." Now, the interesting thing about one of the many interesting things about him during the trial, that he's on trial for statutory rape, there's a little coffee shop in the area, and it's manned by this 15-year-old girl. See where this is going. So during his trial, he's putting the moves on her, and then subsequently starts going out with her. So to show you how celebrity still remains incredibly big, that once again it's very dramatic. How say you, Madam, Mr. Foreman, is he guilty or not guilty? We the jury find Mr. Flynn not guilty. Everybody jumps up. The flash cubes are going off. Everybody was it was just a real tizzy, and then the judge tells the jury, as judges are wont to do. Thank you very much for your attention to the matter. I hope you enjoyed this case as much as I did. It's a rape case, and it was like entertainment. And that night, everyone goes out with the jury, so it was different times. Yeah.
On that Ed Gaines case, did they identify who the other victims were?
Yeah, it's very interesting because he always said that, he had a female, I left this out. Among the many things they discovered was a female body armor that was made of female body parts, so that he can climb into and waltz around in. So, yeah, it was a woman. Interestingly enough, is that when the police, searched his ramshackle, disgusting house, there was only one room in the house that was immaculate, and that was his mother's bedroom. Which is pretty interesting. He was really
So he
very
got caught
gruesome.
because he killed somebody nearby, otherwise these other people were strangers and nobody...
Well, it's very interesting. Did he kill them, or did he just steal their bodies from the local cemetery? He always said the former. He always said that I didn't kill anybody, other than, Mrs. Moore. When you have the heads in the room, it's hard to get them. But, he always said, and he passed a lie detector test, interestingly enough, to say he didn't kill anybody. It was just like a grave rob. Who knows? There were a lot of disappearing stories. Did he do it? Did he not do it? Who knows?
Have you thought about writing another book?
I write my column, Law and History, and my most recent column. If you go on my website, www.r, Mark Kantrowitz, and to get the spelling, you'll have to buy my book, .com, I put my latest columns on there. My latest column is, it's called The Jewish Murderer Who Married the Minister's Daughter, and it has to do with a bank robbery murder in Needham in the early 30s by these three fellows who happened to be Jewish. And one of them, Irv, married a minister's daughter from Natick, which kind of made it sensationalistic. And the gang had killed some people, I think, in Lynn and in Fitchburg. I can't remember. I just can't remember. That's my latest column. And I'm telling you, they really, the girl was not involved. The young lady was not involved, so it wasn't Bonnie and Clyde. But, he was just like those Midwestern, John Dillinger, Babyface Floyd, Ma Barker, those whole gangs, all those times that were happening in mid-America in the 30s. This case, it's maybe if he had a better last name, he would have been, he would have gotten greater fame. But it's a great story. My next story, which is Joan Webster. Remember Joan Webster? She was a Harvard art student who got off a plane in 1980 and was never seen from again. And that's a very interesting story. Probably Lenny the Paradiso probably murdered her. He's dead now. He raped and murdered other women. He probably murdered her also. And the name of my article is Malafemina, Evil Woman in Italian. That was the name of his boat. So if you want to read my column, just do that. I'm going to write another book. I'm not sure quite. I have an idea for like 5 or 6 books. I wrote a novel. When I got back from OU, I wrote a novel. It took me about 4 months. As per my wife correctly, so honey, you have to do a lot of re-editing and work on that novel. So I know that. So I may spend the winter just rewriting that, or I may work on another book. I'm not quite sure. That's what nice being retired. You have the freedom to do that. So anything else? Any other questions? No.
Did you have any information or anything to add about the Jean-Benet Rams case?
A friend of mine, Wendy Murphy, is an attorney,
Oh, yeah.
and Wendy, she's a good friend of mine, and she has all sorts of great theories, and I've gone out to lunch and she's told me, and I don't know.
She was here as a speaker several years ago.
What's that?
She was here as a speaker.
Oh, well,
several years
she's
ago.
really very
She
engaging.
came, we had a men's group at that time. She came talk to us.
She's very, very engaging speaker, and she's really at the forefront of victims' rights
Yes.
and female, with becoming, female sexual assault on campus. Wendy's been doing this for 15 years, so she's really at the forefront. So, in answer to your question, I don't. So I just don't. Afraid I'm soft murder and other one. Someone like me will be writing about this in 80 years, and no one will know who she is. Okay, anything else? No? Listen, it was a pleasure. I love coming here, so thank you so much.